In this episode of Schooled, I talk with two professors, Dr. Amanda Jansen and Dr. James Middleton, about a book they recently put out called Motivation Matters and Interest Counts, Fostering Engagement in Mathematics. This book is a wide-ranging survey of research on motivation and how it does and doesn't work, and particularly applies this research to the mathematics classroom generally at the K-12 level. So in this interview, we talk about things like how motivation does and doesn't work, common misunderstandings about how motivation works, why mathematics classes are often taught in ways that don't really take student motivation terribly seriously, and what teachers can do to remedy that problem. So before I show you the interview, let me introduce our two guests very quickly. Dr. Amanda Jansen is an associate professor at University of Delaware's School of Education. Dr. Jansen focuses primarily on students' engagement in mathematics classroom and teachers learning from their reflections on their own practice. Before working in academia, she was a junior high mathematics teacher in Arizona. Dr. James Middleton is a professor of mechanical engineering and mathematics education at Arizona State University. His research interests focus in the following areas where he's published extensively: children's mathematical thinking, teacher and student motivation in mathematics, and teacher change in mathematics. So what follows is a really wide-ranging interview, and I think it'll be of interest to not only mathematics educators, but really educators, K-12, collegiate, whatever, who are focused and concerned about motivation in the classroom. So I am here with Dr. Jim Middleton and Mandy Jansen, and we're going to be talking about motivation in math today. You all put out a book recently called Motivation Matters, and it's specifically focused towards math education and math educators. So I want to ask you a few questions about that because it's an amazing book. I think it'll a lot of research that's really fascinating in it. So the first several chapters of your book seem to focus on how motivation works. So you talk about how motivation is learned, how motivation is adaptive, how motivation is social in nature. And it seems to me like if we have to summarize the theme of these chapters, it's almost like motivation is not just something that's inborn that you either have or you don't. It seems to me we always talk about people like, oh, she's just not into math, or oh, he's really into math. And then we feel like there's nothing you can do about that, like you just can't change. It seems like a lot of the research you talk about would beg to differ. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
One of the things that when Mandy and I got together to write this book that we talked about at the beginning was that no one is ever unmotivated. To be alive is to be motivated. And in the general sense, that means, orienting yourself in the presses of life, moving in particular areas to get an occupation, working in certain friend circles, in order to increase the pleasure that you have in life and to decrease the pain. And so we're always motivated to move in one direction or another, to move away from one direction and move and perhaps change into a new direction. And mathematics is no different in that sense from other subject matter, from other pursuits in life. Children are always motivated in our classes. And the question is, to what extent are they motivated to do the things that we want them to do, to be moving in the directions that we want them? And the other is, what extent do we even understand what the motivations of students are so that we can take advantage of them in the classroom?
So, Kevin, you were asking about this notion of this idea of I'm a math person or I'm not a math person. And it's interesting because when people learn to improve in other areas of life, I think about my friend. She's learning to improve lifting weights. She takes bodybuilding classes. And she talks about things like my personal record or how much I can lift now versus what I could lift before. And she's thinking about it in terms of her growth. She's not thinking about it like, oh, I was born really strong. She viewed it as I could become stronger. This is actually true in math, but we don't really think about math this way as much. Some people don't. And I think that is because how the discipline is sometimes treated in school. So sometimes we treat the discipline of mathematics as being about answers that you either get right or you get wrong. And the smart people are the ones that find the answers the quickest, the most efficiently. But that's actually not what math is. Mathematics is about seeing a situation and a problem from another perspective, another representation, another point of view, asking a smart question, noticing something that helps us have a deeper understanding. If we're trying to understand the slope of a line, we can think about that, thinking about the distance between 2 points. We can look at it visually on a graph. We can think about it in a story problem with a constant rate of change. And it's in this collection of lots of ways to see the concept that we understand it differently. So if we don't view math as something that we're constantly improving upon, something that can be viewed from a lot of different points of view, something that we can keep having a deeper understanding about, then we're going to think about it as either you can do it or you can't. I'm either going to get the answer because I know the fact, or I'm not going to be able to know the procedure. But instead, I'm thinking about, I worked with elementary pre-service teachers this week thinking about solution strategies to two-digit subtraction problems that young children might use. Yes, we know how to subtract. Yes, we can get the answer quickly. But instead, we're thinking about what's another way to see this? What's another way to represent this? Our own thinking of subtraction keeps growing, keeps changing as we think about other ways to see it, talk about it. So math, when it's about way more than answers, we can view ourselves as continually growing. And that's much more healthy than thinking I was either born able to do this or I wasn't.
I have a lot of teachers say, I was never a math person. They say this up front. I was never good at mathematics. And often, after talking with them about their experiences in mathematics, I have to come to the conclusion that they were never given the chance, that they really don't have any evidentiary warrant that they're not good at mathematics in the type of mathematics that Mandy is telling us that this is what real mathematics is. They have been evaluated by others in situations where the primary criteria is rapid fire delivery of computations. And in my own case, I was at least 35 years old before I remembered 7 times 8 equals 56 as a fact. I could always derive it and needed to, but I would never been a good, fast computational device. And to disabuse people of that opinion about what mathematics is, and to help them engage in something that challenges them, that evokes curiosity, where their attempts, their errors, are important facets of their learning. So where an error is not seen as failure, but an error is seen as information that can help them improve. In the same way, I think that Mandy's example of her friend who's a bodybuilder, the errors in your form allow you to then understand what you need to do, and as you correct them, then you start to improve, and your self-image, your understanding of yourself as a bodybuilder change and develop, and you become more and more motivated in that area.
Right. So, since you guys go over a lot of information about how motivation works, if you were to pick one thing each that you would want teachers and teacher candidates to know about how motivation does and doesn't work, what would that be?
I find continually in my work in motivation, I've spent a lot of time interviewing people to try to understand motivation from their perspectives. Because if we believe that all people are motivated, we have to understand from their point of view what motivates them, or even just why they behave the ways that they do, even if it's a reconstructed notion of why they did that. And when I talk with students, I learn all the time that we can't forget that the classroom is a relational space. The classroom is a social space. We're learning about academic content, but we're learning about it with other people. And so students are constantly negotiating their identities, who they are. Do people think I'm smart? I don't want people to think I'm not smart. They're constantly concerned, as am I, right, with status and am I valued? Am I important here? And so that's happening all the time while we're engaging in our academic work with each other. So we can't forget about how we play a role in positioning students, how students are constantly positioning each other. Issues of status and sense of self are alive all the time in the classroom. And there are things that we can do then to leverage both learning and academic content together. So example, by highlighting a really helpful question that someone asked, does a couple of things. It orients us to the content differently as we think together about that question. But whose question we're highlighting matters too. So when your question is highlighted and you're not used to being recognized as someone that has something valuable to say, it can really help you realize, oh, my thinking does matter. My thinking is useful. Someone listened to me. Someone wants to understand how I think. So instructional moves that can do both support academic learning and then support students' sense of selves really can make a difference.
Again, this is a new view of what of what mathematics class is like. When we teach mathematics, as I gather Mandy's saying, we're not just teaching mathematical content. We're teaching children to become mathematical beings, mathematical thinkers, and to incorporate aspects of mathematics into their own identity. Too often, of course, people incorporate aspects of mathematics kind of negatively, so that they feel I'm not a mathematician or I don't have the ability. And that's unfortunate. And one of the important things in helping, helping negotiate this fullness of the social aspect of the classroom is to deal with issues of challenge, because challenge is critical for motivation in a number of ways. First of all, things that are challenging evoke more curiosity. They're worthy of applying one's intellect towards solving or exploring or describing. Second, because of the curiosity, it helps you develop interest. And interest is a long-term kind of classification of the tasks that we engage in. So if I ask you, what are you interested in? And you tell me, I know a lot about you and how you think about yourself and the other kinds of things that you do. And those interests can help a mathematical motivation in two ways. Number one, students can become interested in mathematics because mathematics is a lens that helps them understand things that they're interested in. I downloaded I won't say a bodybuilding app, but a weightlifting app because I'm getting old and weak this morning, and started looking at the mathematical models for how fast I need to add weights. I quickly saw that it was a linear model, and realized that very soon it's going to outstrip me in what I need to do. And so I have to think about a different mathematical model. But it was interesting because it tied to one of my own interests. And if we do that well in classrooms and provide challenge that evokes students' interests, then the mathematics itself as a discipline can become interesting as a result of its association with our own interests. The third thing about challenge that's absolutely critical is that you need challenge to develop competence. And these things that in particular that Mandy spoke about, related to status, related to who gets to do what and who's a math person's not, are related to our self-conceptions of our own competence and the messages that we receive from the teacher and from students and from parents and from society about our own competence and what makes someone competent. And so the challenge allows these three things: curiosity, interest, and the development of competence, in ways that then can become very productive if managed well in the classroom. The last thing I want to say is that this is manifest. It's not just that, this is not psychological mumbo jumbo, as my mother would have said. That there are distinct physiological changes in the student when they're confronted with challenge and provided support in the kind of a nurturing environment that Mandy's suggesting. That the level of arousal that people see, the level of excitement raises. The cognitive efficiency in solving mathematics problems increases, and so you become a better thinker when you're confronted with challenge. And then, of course, the issue of interest, that then you could consolidate the memories of good experiences in mathematics into a category we would call interest, and later on you could say, yes, this mathematics is an interest of mine. I would like to pursue it, or I'd like to pursue STEM-related careers or economics, which are mathematically intensive.
I think one thing that's really important to note about our book is that this book is, in a way, it's a translational effort and a synthesis effort. So some of the ideas that we're talking about today may have come from research we've done, but a lot of the ideas come from research that other folks have done. So when I talk about positioning students in multiple ways to highlight students' competence, multiple ways of being smart in math, that really comes out of the complex instruction work. Elizabeth Cohen and Rachel Lotan really have done the foundational work in complex instruction. And if people are interested in these notions of multiple ways of being smart in math and highlighting and positioning students to have higher status when they're offering something productive, the complex instruction path is a way to learn more about that. So I wanted to give credit to that notion.
There's a particular quote that I really want to read from the book, because now that we've talked about how motivation works, let's talk about what teachers can and should do with that. So the quote goes as follows: "All teaching is a kind of dance where the partners are the teacher and the student. Each contributes to the mathematical experience's coherence, but like in a traditional ballroom dance, one person must lead. The teacher has a responsibility in the broader knowledge to steer the student in a productive direction." So now that we've talked about how motivation works and what we should take away about how it works, what can teachers do? What are some words of advice you would have for math teachers and maybe other teachers? Motivation is social, it's learned, it's adaptive, etc. What can I do with that?
So if we use that dance metaphor, the teacher is a dancer as well with the student. And I think that often as teachers we forget that we are also students of mathematics, and that we're also learners of mathematics, and we're learners of students' mathematics. To understand what the student is will enable us to then knowing what the composition is, right? Knowing what the dance steps are, knowing how to interpret the music. That by understanding where the student is coming from, and then understanding as much as we can of the mathematics, to be able to then project what the next step might be and where the dance is going. So we take that metaphor. Let's apply that to the classroom. Many teachers that I work with are really committed to learning new and important mathematics, and they realize that with the Common Core and other standards, that the rigor of the mathematics is increasing, and different aspects of the mathematics are becoming manifest that they hadn't learned in their earlier careers. Well, it's important to be a mathematician in the same sense that to teach a student to dance, you have to be a dancer. If you're going to work in improvisational jazz, which is another good metaphor, you need to be a musician and to continue to learn. And you don't have to be the expert. You can be a partner, learning and stepping on toes periodically, and being a mentor to a student who's learning that dance simultaneously. In general, teachers know much more than their students, and so they'll be able to help them through that composition. But I think occasionally the teacher should go out on a limb and be vulnerable like the student with the mathematics, so that the students can see that mathematics, the important thing about mathematics is self-improvement, is the application of effort, so that the outcome is the improvement of knowledge, the improvement of learning, the improvement of skill. And of course that ties to Carol Dweck's work and Joe Bowler's extension of that work specifically in mathematics mindset.
When I'm thinking about mathematics teaching as a dance, I think about it as negotiating meaning and trying to understand each other and the math all at the same time. So I'm constantly working in my own teaching and working with other teachers to shift the classroom dynamic from a place to perform. I'm here to perform a fully worked out solution, and I'm going to explain it to you why it's correct. And now I'm going to share my solution and explain to you why it's correct. I'm trying to shift that dynamic to be a place where we're all trying to understand more together. We're trying to understand more about the mathematics, and I'm trying to understand not only how I think about the math, but about how you think about the math. And we're all trying to do that. So Kevin would share his way of seeing the problem and why it made sense to them, and Jim would share his way of seeing the problem. And we want Kevin to understand Jim, and we want Jim to understand Kevin, and we all want to understand both of them. And that's a hard thing. I was just working with some teachers, and we were struggling to understand each other. And someone said, I think that solution strategy is too hard and children wouldn't get it. And I said, maybe, but maybe we think it's too hard because we don't understand it yet. Anytime you're hearing someone else's strategy that's not the one that comes to you first intuitively, it feels hard because it's not the first thing that we thought of. It's not the first way that we saw things. So it's this dance of constantly trying to check in and make sure we understand each other, and how does that map onto the math anyway, and where does that get us mathematically. So it's constantly this space of back and forth and trying to see the world in a bigger way, see mathematics in a bigger way from a variety of perspectives, just by learning to hear each other.
Great, great. So I noticed that, I mean, you know, the book is about motivation in general, but I wanted to ask you, because it's, I mean, because it really focused on math, particularly. The strategies that you talk about and the research on motivation, is that pretty generalizable across disciplines, or is this stuff that really holds true mostly in math? And I guess the second part of that question is, you know, why is this book really focused towards math? If it is generalizable towards other disciplines, motivation works a similar way in other disciplines. Why did you decide to focus on mathematics for this book specifically?
My answer to Kevin's question is more related to the second part. So I think that there are principles from this book that can generalize to other subject areas, but I think it's particularly important to wrestle with aspects of motivation and engagement in math for multiple reasons. One is the issue that you mentioned at the beginning, Kevin, about how some people really think that math is something you might be born into being good at or not, and that's simply not true. So we want to really challenge that point of view. But the other is that math is used as such a gatekeeper, and we want people to have experiences where math makes sense, where they feel empowered mathematically, where they feel capable of doing math, because we want them to be able to achieve their goals and not feel like it's a system that's holding them back. So we want teachers to create these spaces where students can see themselves as capable because of math being a gatekeeper. So as teachers, we want to have the motivation to create spaces for students to grow and be successful. We have that responsibility, actually.
Yeah. And the architecture of motivation is fairly common from a psychological perspective across disciplines. That people, you know, goals matter, challenge matters, the development of interest matters, identity matters. These are you know, general models that can be applied across many school subjects. But what happens in mathematics, it becomes because of the things that you and Mandy have described, it becomes a special case. Very different than the way in which we conceptualize language learning and reading learning and the arts and sports. These other disciplines have their own quirks as they play out. But mathematics, because of the way, in part because of the way it fits sociologically into economics and careers, and even before that into what it means to be elite historically, right? People who studied mathematics were not the masses. They were the elite who could afford education. And so this is baggage that we have sociologically that influence the ways in which we think psychologically about who we are in relation to all of these sociological, historical, and disciplinary forces. And so it's quite different as in the way in which it's manifest. The whole idea of math anxiety, for example. We're all familiar with this idea that people kind of would freak out because they've had so many scary experiences with mathematics prior that whenever they get an opportunity to even hear mathematics, then all of a sudden the heart rate gets louder and louder, and they want to try to find a way to disengage. You just don't see that kind of there is no concept of reading anxiety that's parallel. Doesn't mean that children may not get anxious in reading, but we don't have the same extent and manifestation of that particular motivational characteristic in the other disciplines. And so mathematics has a unique configuration of ways in which all of these factors interact that are different than other subject matter.
I wonder if part of the reason that you see so much about math anxiety and things, but you don't see about music anxiety or art anxiety or language anxiety. I wonder if part of that is because we were talking before the interview, and I think Mandy, I think you brought up the point of, when we're taught math, we're taught it in a very specific way. You're supposed to, math is about coming up with an answer to a question very quickly. Math is about the solution, not the problem. It's about figuring out a solution, not asking questions. It's about, in some ways, like following an algorithm to find a problem rather than kind of creatively figuring out your way through the problem. I wonder, part of it, the reason math anxiety exists in such an extent is part of function of the way it's taught that way. What do you think about that?
Right. I mean, we know that that's not what math is, but often that's how math is translated. And if math is translated that way, it would be pretty intimidating, because if I don't solve it this way, and then someone's asking me to solve it in a way that doesn't make sense to me, it's going to be intimidating. But it's also this notion of, so Kathy Seeley has a book. She's a former National Council of Teachers of Mathematics president. She has a book called Faster Isn't Smarter. And Joe Bowler has done a lot of writing about reducing timed tests. A lot of people have a memory of math class where you were solving 100 problems in a minute as fast as you can. But that's just measuring your fluency, but it's not really helping you improve. To test someone over and over again doesn't help you get better. And then this sense of associating speed with mathematics, if that's put in your situation over and over and over again, and then if you feel intimidated by that speed, which of course many of us would when we're timed, then we start to feel more anxious. And so often math anxiety is actually performance anxiety, test anxiety, time pressure. So I think we need to release that pressure balloon and promote fluency other ways. So Jo Boaler has a great website called U Cubed, where she writes about alternative approaches to supporting fluency, like talking about your mental math reasoning through number talks, using flashcards, other ways of promoting fluency that aren't about time tests.
This has been a really, really good discussion, and any teacher, professor, or anyone else who's interested in just motivation, and not just math teachers or professors, I would stress, should really go out and look at your book, and after they watch this interview, if they're curious and want to learn more. So Dr. Jansen, Dr. Middleton, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.